Part 1. The night I heard my children dividing my life. The moment I realized my children were waiting for me to die, my youngest daughter was standing in my living room holding a real estate brochure. I'm just saying, Lisa whispered, the market's good right now. If Mom downsizes soon, we could avoid a lot of problems later. I stood frozen halfway down the hallway, one hand pressed against the wall to steady myself. At first, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood. Surely my children weren't discussing my house like I was already gone. But then Michael spoke. "We need to think realistically," he said, in the tired voice he always used when pretending to be responsible. "The roof needs work. Property taxes keep going up. If something happens to Mom suddenly, we'll be stuck dealing with all this." Karen let out a dry laugh. "Something is going to happen eventually. She's 72, Mike." The room fell quiet after that. Not guilty quiet. Comfortable quiet. Like this was a conversation they'd already had before. I could hear David opening and closing kitchen cabinets while muttering, "Honestly, I just don't want the house sitting unsold for months." Then Lisa spoke again, softer this time. "Maybe we should convince her to move into assisted living by spring." That sentence hurt more than all the others combined. Not because I feared getting older. At my age, you make peace with aging eventually. What shattered me was realizing my children were discussing the end of my life like a scheduling inconvenience. I quietly stepped backward into the dark hallway before anyone noticed me standing there. My heart pounded so hard I thought they might hear it through the walls. For several minutes, I sat alone on the edge of my bed, staring at family photographs lining the dresser. 4 children. 4 babies I once carried into this very house wrapped in blankets. And downstairs, they were calmly deciding what to do with my life after I was gone. Or worse, before I was gone. I wish I could say I marched downstairs and confronted them immediately. But people my age were raised differently, especially women. We learned to swallow pain quietly, keep peace inside the family no matter what it cost us personally. So instead, I sat there in silence until I heard car doors closing outside nearly an hour later. Only then did I walk downstairs. Coffee cups still sat on the table. Michael's jacket hung over the chair, and lying beside a stack of mail was a business card from a local realtor. I picked it up slowly. My hands started trembling the moment I saw handwritten notes on the back. Possible listing by summer. That was the exact moment something inside me changed. Not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly, like a door closing forever. My name is Evelyn Parker, and until that night I believed I had raised good children. Not perfect children, but decent ones. After my husband Robert died 31 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I spent most of my life trying to hold this family together with whatever strength I had left. I worked mornings as a school secretary, cleaned office buildings at night, skipped vacations, skipped dating, skipped almost everything that might have made life easier or happier because every extra dollar went toward raising my children and keeping our home. This house became my entire world. The kitchen still had pencil marks inside the pantry doorway showing how tall the kids were each birthday. The living room carpet still carried faint stains from Christmas mornings long ago. Even after all these years, I could still picture Robert sitting in his recliner beside the window, reading newspapers on Sunday mornings. People don't understand this when they're younger. A house is never just a house after enough years pass. It becomes proof that your life mattered. Around 6 the next morning, I made coffee and sat quietly at the kitchen table while snow drifted past the windows outside. For the first time in years, the house felt painfully empty. Not because my children had left, because I suddenly realized how alone I truly was inside this family. Then my phone rang. It was Karen. "Morning, Mom," she said brightly. "Just checking on you." The normalness of her voice made my stomach turn. She asked whether I'd thought any more about downsizing. That word again. As if reducing my life into smaller rooms would somehow make everyone else more comfortable. I answered calmly, "No, Karen, I haven't." There was a pause on the line. Then she sighed gently. "We're just worried about you living alone." They were worried about the house. And for the first time in my life, I finally understood the difference. After hanging up, I opened my address book slowly and stared at one name for a very long time. Martin Feldman. Our family attorney. By 8:30 that morning, I had an appointment scheduled, and none of my children had any idea what I was about to do next. Part 2. The house I sacrificed my life for. Martin Feldman had been our family attorney for almost 40 years. He handled Robert's will after my husband died, helped me refinance the mortgage during difficult years, and once even sat beside me at the hospital, while Michael recovered from a car accident back in the 90s. By the time I walked into his office that snowy morning, Martin took one look at my face and quietly said, "What happened, Evelyn?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I removed the realtor's business card from my purse and placed it carefully on his desk. Then I told him everything. The late-night conversation, the assisted living comments, the plans to sell my home before I was even dead. Martin listened silently with his hands folded together. When I finished speaking, he leaned back slowly in his chair and sighed. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Children can become very strange when property and money get involved." The sadness in his voice somehow hurt more than anger would have, because it meant he'd seen this happen before. Far too many times. Martin asked gently, "What would you like to do?" At first, I didn't know how to answer. For most of my adult life, every decision I made revolved around protecting my children. Even now, part of me still wanted to excuse their behavior. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe they were worried about money. Maybe I'd misunderstood. But deep down, I knew better. People don't secretly contact realtors behind their mother's back because they're concerned about her safety. They do it because they're thinking about ownership. "I want to understand what's happening," I finally said. Martin nodded thoughtfully. Then he asked a question I wasn't prepared for. "Evelyn, do your children have access to your finances?" My stomach tightened immediately. Over the years, I'd trusted Michael with certain paperwork because he was the oldest. Karen occasionally helped pay bills online when my arthritis flared up during winter. I never imagined any danger in that. They were my children. Martin's expression grew more serious. "You need to review everything carefully." After leaving his office, I drove home through light snowfall feeling older than I had the day before. Not physically, emotionally. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing the people you spent your life protecting may no longer see you as fully human, only useful. That afternoon, I pulled old file boxes from the hallway closet and spread paperwork across the dining room table. Bank statements, insurance forms, property tax records. 30 years of life stacked into neat folders. As I sorted through documents, memories kept surfacing unexpectedly. Michael at 10 years old crying because he wanted basketball shoes we couldn't afford. Karen helping me frost cupcakes for school bake sales. David building blanket forts in the living room after thunderstorms. Lisa sleeping beside me after Robert died because she was afraid I'd disappear too. For a moment, I had to stop looking through paperwork altogether because I missed those children. The children before adulthood hardened them. Before money entered everything. Around sunset, I found something strange. A recent property assessment I didn't remember requesting. Folded inside was a printed estimate of the home's current market value. My chest tightened as I read the number. The house was worth far more than I realized. Suddenly, several conversations from recent years started making terrible sense. Karen constantly asking whether I planned to simplify my life. Michael insisting the neighborhood was too much work for someone my age. David casually joking about how valuable old houses are getting now. Even Lisa asking whether I'd ever consider moving closer to family. Maybe none of them started out intending to become greedy, but money changes people slowly, especially people already carrying fear or disappointment in their own lives. That evening, Michael stopped by unexpectedly. He stood in the kitchen drinking coffee while snow fell softly outside the windows. "You doing okay, Mom?" he asked. I studied him carefully. Gray hairs now touched the edges of his beard. His shoulders looked heavier than they used to. At 50 years old, he suddenly seemed tired in ways I'd never noticed before. But beneath that exhaustion, I sensed something else, anxiety. He kept glancing around the house while talking, almost calculating. Then he casually asked, "You ever think about selling this place eventually?" There it was again, that same quiet pressure. I smiled faintly and answered, "Not lately." Michael nodded, but disappointment flickered across his face before disappearing. And in that moment, something painful settled inside me. My children weren't waiting for my happiness anymore. They were waiting for my absence. Later that night, after Michael left, I sat alone in Robert's old recliner, staring at the dark living room. Then I made a decision I never imagined making in my entire life. I opened my desk drawer and began rewriting my will. Part 3. The Secret Plans. They thought I'd never see. Rewriting my will should have made me feel powerful. Instead, I felt sick. For 3 nights straight, I barely slept. Every creak in the house sounded louder than usual. Every family photograph felt like evidence from a life I no longer understood. By the following Monday, Martin had prepared the paperwork for me to review privately. "You don't need to decide everything immediately," he told me gently. But I already knew something fundamental had changed. Once trust cracks inside a family, even ordinary conversations begin sounding different. And suddenly I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. Karen calling more often than usual. Michael asking detailed questions about home repairs. David suddenly volunteering to help organize paperwork. Even Lisa checking whether I'd considered senior communities near Cincinnati. None of it sounded cruel on the surface. That was the frightening part. Everything came wrapped in concern. One rainy afternoon, Karen invited herself over with coffee and pastries from the bakery near her office. For nearly an hour, she talked about harmless things, church events, her youngest son applying to colleges, rising grocery prices. Then almost casually, she said, "You know, Mom, this house is probably too much for one person now." There it was again. Always the house. I kept my expression calm. I managed just fine. Karen gave me the same patient smile parents usually give children. "Well, for now maybe, but things happen fast at your age." At your age? Funny how children start speaking to you differently once your hair turns gray. She walked through the kitchen while talking lightly, touching countertops and cabinets like she was already imagining changes. Then she stopped beside the window. Honestly, she sighed, with today's market, this place could probably sell in a week. My stomach tightened instantly. "How would you know that?" I asked quietly. Karen froze for half a second. Then she smiled too quickly. "Oh, people talk." Number. Someone had already looked into it. That evening after Karen left, I sat in silence, replaying every word. Something told me there was more happening behind my back than I understood. And unfortunately, I was right. 2 days later, Lisa came by unexpectedly after work. Unlike the others, Lisa still carried guilt in her eyes whenever the house came up. At 42, she remained the softest of my children, sensitive, nervous, always trying to keep peace. She helped me bring groceries inside, then lingered awkwardly in the kitchen. Finally, she whispered, "Mom, can I ask you something without you getting upset?" A cold feeling moved through me immediately. "What is it?" Lisa stared down at her coffee cup. "Has Michael talked to you about selling?" There it was, spoken aloud for the first time. I answered carefully. "Why would he?" Lisa hesitated so long I could hear the refrigerator humming behind us. Then quietly she said, "Because he already had a realtor come look at the house." For a moment, I honestly couldn't breathe. "What?" Lisa's eyes filled with tears immediately. "You were at your cardiology appointment last month," she whispered. Michael told the realtor he was helping prepare for future planning. Karen and David were there too. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. Inside my own house, walking through my bedroom, my kitchen, Robert's study, like vultures measuring land before the funeral. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. Lisa started crying. "Because they said they were only trying to help, and I didn't want to believe it sounded as bad as it felt." That answer hurt because I understood it completely. Sometimes people stay silent not because they agree with cruelty, but because facing the truth feels unbearable. After Lisa left, I walked slowly through every room in the house. The hallway where the kids measured their height growing up. The dining room where we ate burnt Thanksgiving turkeys during hard years. Robert's old workshop in the garage that still smelled faintly of sawdust after 3 decades. By the time I reached our bedroom upstairs, tears blurred my vision completely. Not because of the house itself, because my children had turned memories into inventory. That night, I opened my laptop for the first time in weeks, and there it was. An email chain Lisa accidentally forwarded while trying to defend me. Michael discussing estimated property value. Karen talking about convincing Mom gently. David asking whether small renovations could increase resale price. One sentence nearly stopped my heart. "We need to figure this out before something unexpected happens to her." To her. Not Mom. Not Mother. Just her. I stared at the screen for a very long time. Then I closed the laptop quietly, wiped my tears, and picked up the phone. "Martin," I said when my attorney answered, "I've made my final decision." Part 4. The decision that shocked my family. The Sunday dinner started exactly the way family dinners always had in our house. Too much food, too much silence, and too many people pretending everything was normal. I stood at the stove stirring gravy while Karen arranged rolls into a basket like she was hosting a magazine photo shoot instead of sitting inside the home she'd already planned to sell. Michael sat at the dining table checking emails on his phone. David flipped through television channels in the living room. Lisa helped set plates quietly, barely speaking at all. Watching them together that evening felt strange. For years, I would have looked at my children and felt pride. Now I mostly felt distance. During dinner, conversation stayed shallow at first. Weather, gas prices, David complaining about politics, Karen talking about her son's college applications. Then right on schedule, Michael cleared his throat. "Mom," he began carefully, "have you given any more thought to downsizing?" There it was again. That word had started sounding less like concern and more like a sales pitch. I placed my fork down slowly. "Number." Michael forced a small smile. "We're only thinking long-term here." Karen nodded immediately. "This house is a lot for someone your age. Someone your age. Not you. Not Mom. Just an aging problem to manage." I looked around the table quietly. 4 adults sitting inside the home that cost me nearly everything to keep. The mortgage payments after Robert died, the second jobs, the exhaustion, the nights I cried privately because I didn't know how I'd buy groceries and school clothes in the same week. And now they were discussing my future like board members handling an aging employee. Then David spoke. "Well, honestly, the market's probably never going to be better than it is right now." I turned toward him slowly. "How would you know that?" David froze. Just for a second, but it was enough. Michael immediately jumped in. "We've all looked into housing prices lately. Everybody does." Number. "Not like this. Not together. Not behind my back." Karen tried changing the subject, but the room already felt different now. Tense. Exposed. Then Michael made the mistake that changed everything. If the house sold near $450 like the realtor estimated. He stopped instantly. Silence swallowed the room. Lisa lowered her eyes toward her plate. David stared at the table. Karen looked horrified. And Michael realized too late what he'd admitted. I folded my napkin carefully into my lap. "The realtor?" I asked softly. Nobody answered. For several seconds, the only sound came from the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Finally, Michael sighed heavily. "Mom, we were trying to help." Help. That word nearly made me laugh. "You brought a realtor into my home without asking me." Karen immediately started crying. "We thought you'd overreact." I stared at her in disbelief. "Overreact." Michael rubbed his forehead. "You're 72, Mom. We need to start being realistic." Realistic. Such a cold word. Especially coming from your own children. I looked at each of them slowly. Michael exhausted and buried under financial pressure. Karen terrified of losing the wealthy lifestyle she fought so hard to build. David drifting through life avoiding responsibility. And Lisa, the only one who still looked ashamed. For the first time in my life, I stopped protecting them from consequences. "I know about the emails," I said quietly. Every face at the table changed instantly. Karen whispered, "What?" "I know about the realtor visit. I know about the discussions. I know you've already been dividing this house in your heads before I'm even gone." Nobody spoke. Nobody denied it. That hurt worst of all. Michael finally leaned forward. "We weren't wishing you dead." "No," I answered calmly. "You were just preparing for my absence." The room fell completely silent. Then I reached into my purse and removed a folded envelope. "I met with Martin Feldman last week." Karen's face turned pale immediately. "Our lawyer." "Yes." Michael stared at me carefully now. "Why?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "Because I changed my will." The reaction was immediate. Karen gasped. David muttered, "Oh my God." And Michael simply sat there frozen. I spoke slowly and clearly. "When I die, this house will not belong to any of you." Nobody moved. "It's being placed into a trust. Most of the proceeds will go to a housing charity for elderly women who've been abandoned or financially destroyed later in life." Karen burst into tears instantly. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" But for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. Part 5. The cruel words I never forgot. Karen cried all the way through dessert. Not quiet tears either. The loud, emotional kind that fills a room and makes everyone uncomfortable. "You're punishing us," she kept repeating. "That's what this is." I sat quietly at the end of the table while the roast turned cold between us. For years, scenes like this always ended the same way. I apologized. I softened. I tried to fix everyone's feelings before my own. But that night felt different. Maybe because something inside me had already broken weeks earlier in that hallway when I heard my children discussing my death like a future business arrangement. Michael finally stood up from the table. "You're being unfair, Mom." I looked at him calmly. Was it fair bringing a realtor into my house without permission? His jaw tightened. We were trying to prepare. For what I asked softly, my funeral? Nobody answered. David pushed his chair back loudly. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "After everything we've been through as a family," I almost laughed at that, because families always say everything we've been through when they want credit for surviving pain they helped create. Karen wiped her eyes angrily. "You think we're monsters now." "No," I answered honestly. "I think you stopped seeing me as a person." That sentence landed harder than yelling ever could have. Even Lisa looked shaken. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then years of buried resentment finally started pouring out all at once. Michael talked about the pressure of being the oldest son after Robert died. Karen brought up childhood embarrassment over wearing secondhand clothes to school. David complained that nobody ever believed in him. And Lisa, quiet little Lisa, suddenly snapped. "You all started treating Mom like she was already gone." The room went silent. Lisa's hands were trembling. "She's still sitting right here," she whispered. "And all any of you care about is this house." Michael rubbed both hands over his face. "You don't understand what it's like right now." "No," Lisa shot back. "You don't understand." Then Michael said something I don't think he meant to say out loud. "If Mom dies tomorrow, none of us are financially okay." The words hit the room like shattered glass. Karen immediately started crying harder. David looked away. And suddenly, I understood everything. This wasn't only greed, it was fear. Middle-aged people carrying debt failure, unstable marriages, rising bills, and private disappointments they never admitted to anyone. The house had become their emotional life raft. And somewhere along the way, they convinced themselves they deserved it. I looked at my son, 50 years old now, and for the first time, I saw exhaustion instead of entitlement. But pain doesn't erase betrayal. "I would have helped you," I said quietly. Michael's eyes filled instantly. That's the worst part. Because it was true. If any one of my children had come to me honestly, I would have done whatever I could. Instead, they chose secrecy. Karen stared down into her lap. "My mortgage is 3 months behind," she admitted softly. David muttered, "I haven't worked steadily in almost a year." Lisa finally confessed she'd known about the realtor visit for weeks, but was too afraid to stop it. And Michael looked completely broken. "I took out a second loan after the restaurant failed," he whispered. "I'm drowning, Mom." The anger inside me softened slightly then. Not disappeared, but softened. Because suddenly, I wasn't looking at villains. I was looking at 4 frightened adults who never learned how to deal with failure without hiding behind pride. And maybe part of that was my fault too. After Robert died, I spent so many years trying to protect my children from hardship that I never taught them how to survive emotional pain, honestly. We became a family that avoided difficult conversations until everything exploded. The clock ticked quietly in the hallway while nobody moved. Then Karen whispered something I'll never forget. "We thought you'd always save us." I closed my eyes for a moment, because mothers like me spend entire lifetimes teaching children exactly that. Near midnight, everyone finally left one by one. No shouting, no slammed doors, just sadness, real sadness. After the house grew quiet again, I walked slowly into the kitchen to clean dishes. But halfway across the room, a sharp pain suddenly tightened across my chest. The plate slipped from my hands and shattered against the floor. And for the first time in years, I was truly afraid. Part 6, What Really Matters at the End of Life. I remember the ambulance lights reflecting across my living room ceiling more clearly than I remember the pain itself. Red, blue, Red again. The paramedic kept asking me questions while another pressed sticky monitors against my chest. "Ma'am, stay with me." I wanted to answer calmly, but fear does strange things to older people when they suddenly realize how fragile life truly is, especially when you live alone. By the time we reached Mercy Hospital, all 4 of my children had already arrived. I could hear their voices outside the emergency room curtain before I even opened my eyes fully. Karen was crying again. Michael sounded panicked. David kept pacing the hallway. And Lisa, sweet Lisa, was praying softly under her breath. For a moment, hearing them frightened for me instead of fighting over my house brought tears to my eyes. The doctor later explained it was not a major heart attack. Severe stress, high blood pressure, exhaustion. At your age, he warned gently, emotional stress affects the body more than people realize. At your age. Funny how often I'd heard those words lately. They moved me into a private room shortly before sunrise. Outside the window, Ohio snow covered the parking lot in soft white silence. Inside the room, my children sat together looking emotionally drained. Older, too. Not like the children I raised. Like tired adults suddenly realizing parents do not live forever. Michael approached my bedside first. His eyes looked bloodshot from crying. "I'm sorry, Mom." Just 3 words. But they sounded real this time. Not defensive, not manipulative, just broken. Karen stood quietly near the window, twisting tissues in her hands. David wouldn't stop rubbing his forehead nervously. Lisa sat closest to me, holding my hand carefully like she used to when she was little. Nobody mentioned the house. Not once. Hours passed slowly. At some point, the nurse brought coffee and stale vending machine sandwiches none of us really ate. Then little by little, the truth finally started coming out. Not about money, about pain. Michael admitted he'd been terrified for years after losing his restaurant business. "I kept feeling like Dad would have handled life better than me," he whispered. Karen confessed she and her husband were drowning financially, trying to maintain appearances they could no longer afford. "We're maxed out on almost everything," she said quietly. I didn't want anyone knowing. David stared at the floor for a long time before finally speaking. "I honestly don't know what happened to me," he admitted. "One day I was young. Then suddenly I was 50 and felt like my whole life slipped away." That one hurt me deeply. Because I think many people our age understand that feeling. Life moves fast. Faster than you expect. Then Lisa began crying softly. "I hated what we were becoming," she whispered, "but I didn't know how to stop it." The room fell silent after that. And sitting there listening to my children speak honestly for the first time in years, I realized something painful. The house was never truly the problem. Fear was. Fear of aging, fear of failure, fear of losing stability, fear of becoming alone. Money had simply given those fears somewhere to hide. Finally, Michael looked directly at me. "We made you feel disposable," he said quietly. I didn't answer immediately because hearing your child say something like that out loud changes you forever. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "When your father died, I spent so much energy trying to protect all of you from hardship. I forgot to teach you how to face hardship honestly." Karen wiped tears from her face. "We should have come to you." "Yes," I said softly. "You should have." No anger remained in my voice anymore, only sadness, and strangely enough, relief. Because after years of pretending everything inside our family was fine, the truth finally sat openly in the room with us. Ugly, painful, but honest. Late that evening, after the nurse adjusted my medication, I looked at all 4 of my children sitting there together beneath the dim hospital lights. And for the first time in a very long while, I saw my family again. Not perfect, not healed, but human. Before everyone left for the night, I asked them one final thing. "Come home tomorrow," I whispered. All 4 nodded quietly, because there was still one conversation left our family needed to have. Part 7. The real inheritance I left behind. The following evening, all 4 of my children came back to the house. For the first time in weeks, nobody arrived arguing. No one brought up real estate prices. No one mentioned assisted living. And strangely enough, the silence inside the house felt softer now. Outside, snow covered the neighborhood in quiet white light, while the porch lamp glowed against the darkness. Inside, I sat in Robert's old recliner, waiting for my children to settle into the same living room where everything had fallen apart. Funny how life works sometimes. One room can hold decades of love and heartbreak at the same time. Michael sat closest to me. Karen stayed near the fireplace, wrapped tightly in her sweater. David looked uncomfortable the entire time, like he still wasn't sure he deserved to be there. Lisa quietly brought everyone coffee before sitting beside me on the couch. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then Michael finally cleared his throat. "You scared us yesterday, Mom." I looked at him carefully. I scared myself too. That honesty changed something in the room immediately. Because older people spend so much time pretending we're strong for everyone else that sometimes our own children forget we're frightened too. Karen wiped at her eyes. When the hospital called, she whispered all I could think was, what if the last thing we did was fight over a house? Nobody had an answer for that. The grandfather clock ticked softly in the hallway. The same clock Robert bought at an estate sale back in 1984. The same clock my children grew up hearing every night of their lives. Finally, I folded my hands together and spoke. "I'm not changing the trust." Michael lowered his eyes immediately, but before disappointment could settle fully across the room, I continued. "But I also don't want the rest of our lives defined by this." Karen started crying quietly again. Not dramatic tears this time. Just grief. Real grief. "I forgot you were still a person," she whispered painfully. "Not just Mom." That sentence nearly broke my heart. Because motherhood can slowly erase women if we aren't careful. People stop seeing your fears, your loneliness, your exhaustion. Eventually, they only see what you provide. Meals, advice, money, help, stability. And somewhere along the way, even your own children forget you were once young too. David finally spoke next. "I think we all thought there would always be more time." Nobody disagreed. At our age, time becomes the one thing every family silently fears losing. Michael looked directly at me then. "I was drowning financially," he admitted. "And instead of telling you the truth, I started looking at the house like it was some kind of rescue plan." Lisa shook her head sadly. "We stopped acting like family." "Yes," I answered softly, "we did." But for the first time in weeks, nobody became defensive hearing the truth. That's the thing about families after enough pain, eventually exhaustion becomes more powerful than pride. I reached beside my chair and picked up a folder. Inside were copies of the trust documents. "I made one adjustment," I said. All 4 children looked up immediately. "When I'm gone, the majority still goes toward the women's housing charity." Nobody argued. Not this time. "But a smaller portion will be divided between all of you equally." Karen blinked in surprise. "Why?" I smiled sadly. "Because punishment wasn't really what I wanted." The room fell quiet again. "I wanted you to understand what this house actually cost. Not financially, emotionally. The missed sleep, the double shifts, the loneliness after Robert died, the years spent pretending I wasn't scared so none of them would be scared either." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Lisa quietly stood and walked toward the old family photographs lining the hallway shelf. "There's Dad," she whispered softly. All 4 children slowly gathered beside her, and standing there watching my grown children stare at those old pictures together, I realized something important. Families don't heal through money. They heal through honesty. Months later, life looked different. Not perfect, but different. Michael found steady work managing a hardware store. Karen and her husband sold their oversized home and downsized honestly instead of pretending everything was fine. David finally started therapy. And Lisa visited every Sunday simply to drink coffee with me and talk. No hidden agendas. No discussions about inheritance. Just time together. These days, the house feels peaceful again. And honestly, I think Robert would be proud of that. If this story touched you in some way, if you've ever felt invisible inside your own family or struggled to hold people together while quietly falling apart yourself, I hope you remember this. The greatest inheritance we leave behind is not property. It's the way we teach people to love each other after we're gone. And if this story meant something to you, feel free to share your thoughts or pass it along to someone who may need it today. Because growing older becomes a little less lonely when we remind each other we're not alone in these struggles. Thank you so much for listening. Please leave your thoughts and feedback in the comments to help support and improve the channel. And if you enjoyed the story, please support the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this video with others as well.